What do you do when it feels like your spiritual life is crumbling? When trusted leaders fail, doubts rise, grief hits, and you don't know what to believe in anymore? In her new book, Someone to Believe In, embracing the Saviour who stays the same when everything else changes, author and Bible teacher Courtney Reisig helps us to see Jesus' unshakable character. If you're not sure whether you believe in Jesus yet, or if your faith feels unsteady in the face of grieving, burnout, or disillusionment, this book invites you to encounter Jesus as the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Get your copy of Someone to Believe In today at someonetobelievein.com. The Sing hymnal from award-winning hymn writers Keith and Kristen Getty is a rich collection of classic and contemporary hymns created to deepen worship, foster unity in the church, and proclaim the hope that we have in Christ. Alongside beloved hymns, you'll also find psalms paired with songs, liturgical readings, and helpful indices, making this hymnal a lasting resource for families and congregations alike. Pick up your copy wherever books are sold, or get 30% off at crossway.org/Getty hymnal with a free Crossway Plus account. You guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast, and I'm here with Ana Ávila. Ana works as a senior writer for the Spanish version of the Gospel Coalition and consulting scholar for Blueprint 1543. She's the creator and host of Pienza podcast and has an undergraduate degree in clinical biochemistry and a diploma in biblical studies. Ana is author of Make the Most of Your Productivity, a guide to honouring God with your time, which we'll be talking about primarily today. That book's available in both Spanish and English. She was born in Mexico and now lives in Guatemala with her husband and their children. Now, when Ana and I first scheduled this podcast, she was living with her husband and two children outside the womb, as it were, and one in the womb. And then rather wonderfully, Ana needed to reschedule because her baby arrived slightly earlier than anticipated. So yes. Congratulations, Ana.
Thank you so much.
I remember when I had my third child, Luke, I actually wrote my first book while I was pregnant with him for one reason or another. And so not long after he was born, I was doing interviews and writing articles and whatever. And I remember being in a sort of state of mind where I was so sleep deprived that I could barely finish a sentence. Like just the chronic, I'm sure
Yes.
You're there right now, just like not getting, 2 hours sleep at a time sounds amazing.
Hopefully I make sense in English.
Well, it was funny there because, and I'm sure you'll find this as well, I could barely put a sentence together in normal life. But somehow, if I was being interviewed or if I was writing something, like the Lord would like somehow sort of resurrect my brain enough to do that thing, and
this
then it would go back.
This is my first try to do anything smart after giving birth. So
well done.
We'll see how it goes because I haven't written anything. I've read a lot. Postpartum is great for reading, but not deep, philosophical, profound reading. It's just like romance novels or very light Christian living books. I've read like 20 because you have to do something while you're breastfeeding. And I vowed not to doom scroll my way through postpartum. So I've read a lot, but nothing too deep. So this is my first try of doing something smart. I have a quick question. How old is Luke?
He's 6.
Okay, then, yeah. I was thinking about this this morning because I remember about 7 years ago, we were at the Gospel Coalition National Conference, and there was this gathering for women's writers at the Gospel Coalition. You were there. I was there too. You didn't know me, but we were on the same table.
Yeah.
And you were pregnant. And I remember thinking like, oh, I love to write. I want to continue to do this forever, but I also want to have children. How does she do it? Like, I don't understand. And I was so afraid of like pregnancy and children and how that would affect my writing or whatever. Now I couldn't care less. But I just remember seeing you pregnant and writing and doing interviews and such. And I was so inspired by you. So you didn't know that, but I wanted to say it. So thank you.
Oh, that's really kind. Well, funnily enough, I actually think becoming a mother has made me much more efficient.
Oh.
And that sort of transitions us to the topic of, so your recent book, make the most of your productivity. sort of very resonant with this because before I had children, I'd go to work and I'd have all the live long day to do what I was going to do.
Yes.
And then I started working part-time once I had my first child, who's now 14. And that changed my life in so many ways, but not least, it changed my life because I suddenly had limited time to do of course, we all have limited time, like regardless of our life circumstances. So that's sort of a silly thing to say, but I had sort of, the limits on my time were suddenly quite drastic.
Yes.
And I found that I just needed to be more productive with the time that I had, if that makes sense. I'm curious if that's been
completely
your experience.
Yeah, that happened to me too with my first kid. And I remember I just have to do everything while he naps. So I was super productive during naps. So yes, I completely relate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, and again, I think this relates to the whole sort of topic of productivity. I think having children puts whatever kind of work you're doing also in perspective, in the sense that I think it's hard to have children and also think that your work is like the most important thing, the thing before which everything else has to bow at all times. So it sort of gives you that kind of perspective. I think as well, just recognizing all the different parts of our life, if we are followers of Jesus, can be fruitful work. And work can have all sorts of resonances. But there's work involved in breastfeeding. There's work involved in changing diapers. There's work involved in reading to a child or feeding your children. And there's work involved in participating in our local church. And there's work involved in writing. And there's work involved in the kinds of day jobs that many of our listeners will be doing. And actually, there's no sort of one kind of work that's necessarily more or less important than another. But that anything we do, as Paul writes in his letter to the Colossians, like whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, is working for the Lord and not for humans. And we can actually do that kind of regardless of the kind of work that we're doing.
Yes. And it took me a while, even though I completely agree. And in theory, I would affirm this from years ago while I was writing the book. This is included in the book. But I do believe, with shame, I have to admit, that when I had my first kid, I still had it in me for some reason to try to prove that I was more than just a mom or whatever. Because I remember somebody telling me, and this like straight to my face, like, oh, Ana was a great writer and worker, but then she had a kid. And my colleague said that to my face. And that just stuck with me, and it just became like the focus of everything I did, and I didn't see it at the time. Of course, I would say, no, my children are more important, or like the things you have to say. But in the back of my head, there was always this need to prove everyone that I still had the brains and still had the drive and still had all the things, and I was a great writer and blah blah blah. But now with my third kid, I feel so much freer. Like I feel like all the things that were in my brain finally went into my heart, and I see the difference. I'm enjoying this pregnancy and postpartum much more than I did with my first child. And it's so important to not only know your stuff, but actually embrace it and believe it, and praying for God to open your eyes to actually see these things we say so often, right?
Yeah, no, I think there are two traps that we can fall into in this area. One is, around motherhood, and listeners who might be interested in this conversation. I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine who stays home full time with her 4 girls in the last season, where we're sort of thinking about motherhood and parenting from a Christian perspective, and what it does and doesn't mean, and how actually different people can legitimately and are legitimately, I think, called to different modes. So, I have some friends who are full-time at home with their children. I have some friends who work full-time. I have some friends who, like me, work part-time. That actually there's not sort of one way of doing this from a Christian perspective. But I think we can fall on the one hand into the trap of thinking only sort of paid or externally recognized work is valuable and sort of gives us value and meaning, and mothering is is sort of not valuable in and of itself. Or the sort of the other way is to say, if you're a Christian woman, then your sole purpose is to be a wife and a mother, and actually that should sort of trump everything else in your life at all times. And sometimes I think we can even get into the space of that becoming what Christians would sometimes sort of describe as an idol, like something in our life that it could be a perfectly good thing in and of itself, but something that we put above our relationship with God. And so when people talk about like, oh, you know, as a Christian woman, my children and my husband are like my first priority, I'm always slightly nervous of that way of formulating things, because actually Jesus is our first priority, and following him will look a whole lot of different ways. But even something as good as children can become, you know, an idol if we're putting them above our relationship with the Lord and what he's calling us to, which may well include caring for them. Certainly does if we're their parents. But I think we need to sort of, whatever the life situation we're in, have a kind of orientation of our lives like under Jesus first, and then look at, you know, how does that play out in different parts of my life?
Completely, yes.
On that front, Anna, so tell us why you were motivated to write a book about productivity. What was it that sort of put that idea in your mind in the first place?
Yeah, well, I've always loved productivity because, as my previous answer might have made people see, I'm a driven person. I like to accomplish things. I've always been that kid who wanted to be the best at school and all these extracurriculars and stuff. So productivity was a hobby of mine. I was always looking for the best way to get all my homework done and all of the things. So it was something very personal, something that I studied because I liked it. And when I decided to truly follow Jesus, because I was born in a Christian household and I memorized the Bible and all of the things, but when I was 15, I realized that I was just doing church and Christian things to I don't know, be the good girl. I like to be the good girl. But God confronted me, and I realized that I wasn't actually following Jesus. I was just seeking the approval of people. So I repented and I started to actually follow Jesus when I was 15. And then I continued to read about productivity and trying to do my best to be the best student and the best worker. My motivations were definitely changing. It was not about being the best for being the best's sake or to get the applause from people, although of course there's sin in all of us and that temptation was still there. And it's sometimes still there. But I started to realize that my productivity was not about being the best, but about glorifying God and about trying to do everything I do with excellence for the glory of God and not the glory of the praise of men. And for me, the concept of productivity and of stewardship that we see in the Bible, that nothing belongs to us, that we belong to God, our time belongs to God, our energy, our talents, it's all for him. So it clicked for me. It was very natural. And I started talking with friends about this, and they started saying things like, I've never thought about this way. This is like something completely new to me. I was like, really? So I decided I should write about this. I should tell more people about this. So that's how I decided to write the book, because it was something that, because of my nature and my story, was very intuitive to me. And when I was talking to other people, it seemed something new to them. So I was like, okay, I want to share this with people. And one of my biggest influences was Tim Keller with his book, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. I remember the moment I read that book in one sitting, because it's a very short book. I was recording a podcast and it went terribly. I was so embarrassed. I was like, I will never, ever, ever speak again. I will never write again. I will never show my face anywhere public again. I was so crushed about how it went. And during that season, I read that book. And that book, for people who haven't read it, is all about how the Apostle Paul was able to, at the same time, be one of the most influential people of the first century and recognize himself as the worst of all sinners. I don't know how it's said in the English Bible, but in Spanish es el de los pecadores soy el primero, the first of all sinners. And his ego wouldn't be all inflated or depleted. He would be firm in what he knew he was in God. And that's because of the gospel of what Jesus did on the cross. He gave us a new identity. We are secure in him. We're loved by God, and no one can take us away from God's love. So when I was reading that and at the same time feeling really crushed about the podcast thing I did so badly, I just realized that for most of my life, I was using productivity wrong. I was using it to boost my ego instead of actually being productive from a secure place like Paul was, to actually do the work that God has given me to do. And shortly after that, reading the book and being crushed by my poor performance on the podcast, my boss, I remember he called me like, "Hey, Ana, we're going to do this podcast about blah, blah, blah." And he was not asking me. He was not like suggesting, like, he was like, "You're going to do it." And I sort of felt like God telling me, like, "You're going to pick yourself up and continue to be used by me as I wished." So that was very influential to me, and what is one of the books that informed a lot of what I wrote.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think of the way that I experience my kids as being sort of helpful in this area, and that, yesterday, for instance, I went to a violin recital with one of my kids, and she's started learning the violin not too long ago, and so she's at a relatively basic level, and there were kids performing who were less far along than she was, and there were kids performing who were much more advanced than she was, and she did a great job of playing the piece that she was playing, and I was proud of her and delighted in her, but I was fundamentally proud of her because she's my child. Do you know, like, I actually, yes. Because I love her, I delighted in her performance. And when God looks at us, if we're followers of Jesus, and if we're people who have sort of thrown ourselves on Jesus's mercy, and therefore in the Bible's sort of language been united with Jesus, so that we are, as Paul often puts it, sort of in Christ, then when God looks at us in all our inadequacy and failure and all the sort of weakness of our efforts that are often no better than a toddler's drawing in his eyes, with all the sin that we bring into any of our work as well, he nonetheless looks at us and at what we're doing, under him with delight, actually, like, yes. with sort of pride and joy, not because he can't see the weaknesses and he can't see the sin, but because we are so united with Jesus, who is so completely pleasing to him, that we sort of bask in Jesus' glory, I guess, all day long as we do what we're doing.
Yes. And at the same time, speaking of toddlers drawing, my kid doesn't like to color. He's one of those children who you put a picture in front of him and he would just like pass like for 2 seconds the color and he will be done. And he would bring me a lot of the time these pictures, like half filled up pictures. And now it's a running joke between us, because I would look at him like, "Dude, you didn't even make an effort," because I know he can do much better, but he doesn't want to. So it's now a running joke with us. But last Sunday at Sunday school, he actually did a craft and he did it well, and he was excited about it. And he was not excited about the art per se, because he doesn't like coloring much, but he was excited about teaching me what they were taught in class using the craft. And he was really excited and explaining everything. And I think God is also like that with us. He delights in us because we're his children, but he has given us all these gifts and this energy and this time and this sphere of influence for us to steward well and to cultivate and grow. And sometimes we're just like that, my kid, just like, "Oh yeah, whatever, here it is." And sometimes we are really invested and excited. And God also notices that and is glorified when we are doing the best we can with what he has given us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My friend and fellow author Blair Lynn remembers the moment the floor dropped out beneath her. What followed were panic attacks, ER visits, and waves of anxiety so intense they left her trembling, breathless, and afraid she might die. As a Christian, she knew she should cast her cares on God, but she didn't know how. In the depths of fear and discouragement, Simple answers and spiritual cliches fell flat. There was no quick fix, no bypassing the valley. In Made to Tremble, Blair shares how she learned to walk with God through her anxiety, not around it. With scripture, story, and raw honesty, she shows what it means to embrace our weakness, not as failure, but as the place where God meets us most tenderly. This is a book for anyone who feels overwhelmed, afraid, or unsure if faith can hold in the storm. Through Blair's story, discover the peace of God and a deeper awe of the God of peace. Get your copy at madetotremble.com. I'm curious, Anna, as you research for this book, were there any sort of books written by non-Christian authors that you found helpful in terms of, I don't know, thinking about the sort of psychology of productivity and how we can make the most of the personalities and gifts and time that God has given us, even sort of thinking from that perspective?
Yes, there were many. One of them, and I'm sure many in your audience would have at least heard about this book. It's very popular. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he's my favorite writer on habits. He's very practical, and his book provides a very complete guide on how to build better habits and how to cut off bad ones. I think the Bible and our Christian perspective on the world provide us a very good guide on how to determine which habits are good and which habits are bad. But regarding how to cultivate good habits and how to try to minimize the bad ones, James Clear provides a very, very good guide on that. I think sometimes, a lot of the time, people really undervalue or underestimate how big of a change they can make in their lives with very small adjustments, with very small steps. And in my book, I say every step counts, every step in the right direction counts. And there's a quote by James Clear that I really like. Again, I'm going to butcher it in English because I read the book in Spanish, or I wrote it in Spanish when I wrote the book. But he says every action you realize is a vote in favor of the person you want to become, or something along those lines. And it's very encouraging to remember that we have opportunities every day, every second, every moment to cultivate and become the kind of person God wants us to become, the kind of person I believe we want to become. And we don't have to make big changes. We can take it one step at a time. And I think there's a lot of grace there.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been reflecting on recently is how people often talk a lot about time management, which is an important thing to think about. I think people often think less about what you might call kind of emotional management. Because to some extent, I could have all the time in the world today to write, for example. And if I'm in an emotional place that is just not it, if I'm sort of emotionally off and can't redirect from that, I will in fact waste that time. Conversely, if I have only a brief window, but I'm in the right sort of frame of mind and I have the sort of right emotional setup, then I can be really fruitful. I can write a whole bunch and it can be good. And I'm curious for your reflections on that. How can we all think better about not only the sort of time management elements of life, but how we could sort of set ourselves up for success in terms of emotional management?
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I believe what we call spiritual disciplines are so important, is these moments during the day when we stop and we recenter ourselves, we bring our minds to the truth of who God is, what we are in light of what Jesus has done for us on the cross. As we said before, we are united with Him. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. He's with us. He is the one who empowers us. The Bible is full of truths about how we don't have to be strong. He is a strong one. We can be weak and He will be glorified in our weakness. Or I'm reminded of the story of Moses, who was sent by God to free the people of Israel from Egypt. And he felt so inadequate for the task. And God was not all like, no, Moses, you can do it. You're really smart and everything's going to be all right. God said, I am who I am. I am the one who's sending you. So that's all you need to know. And I think reminding ourselves continuously of these truths, that God is with us, that is not in our own strength or our own intelligence, but in His Spirit, really empowers us to take the task that is in front of us, and sometimes feels daunting, sometimes feels like it's completely impossible. We can surrender to that feeling and say, yeah, it might be impossible. Yeah, I'm not smart enough. I'm not strong enough, but it's okay because God is with me. And just having this habit of centering ourselves to spiritual disciplines, through Bible reading, through prayer, through communion with the saints, just gathering with other people who remind us who God is. I think that's really important. And I think pushing through has a bad rep right now because everything's all about how you feel and take your me time. And I value rest. In the book, I talk a lot about rest and stepping back. Sometimes that is called for, and some of us are more inclined to push through making an idol of accomplishing things and stuff. But I do believe that pushing through a lot of the time can be an act of faith. There's a writer, I took a course on writing a while ago, or I saw one of those videos that are on Coursera or something like that. And I don't know who this guy is. I've never read anything he wrote. Simon Bambui, I think is called. But I remember he said something along the lines of writing is an act of faith. And that really stuck with me. And he was saying it because, I mean, you write and you don't know if it's going to be published. You don't know if anyone is going to read it or like it or be helped by it. And that is all truth. But I take that phrase, and when I say it and when I'm reminded of it, I take it to mean that I am saying with my actions, like, even though I feel like I have nothing to give, I believe you've sent me to do this, and this is a good work you've prepared for me, as Ephesians 2:10 says. So I'm going to do it. And that is why writing for me as a writer is an act of faith. It's just worship, because I don't feel like doing it and I don't feel like I can, and I feel like it's pointless, but here I am. So that is also helpful when we are feeling completely depleted or confused or frustrated. We can acknowledge all of that. God is not expecting us to fake it till we make it or paint a smile on our faces and pretend that we feel great all the time. The Bible is filled with crying and lament and prayers of sorrow, of confusion, of anger even. So I believe we can express all that, but I do believe that we then have to take a leap of faith and, in my case, write or change a diaper or have a conversation with my preteen and all the things that we feel inadequate to do.
Yeah. I empathize with that as a writer. I sometimes will find myself sort of caught up in the feeling of like, oh, I'm probably terrible. Like, this is, I'm working on this book and it's probably no good, and probably I can't do this, and probably,
Yes.
And then I remind myself, I actually don't have time to worry about whether, it's a waste of my time to worry about whether I'm good enough, because that's not even the question. The question is, will the Lord help me? And is, the Lord will help me to accomplish whatever His purposes are. And, maybe His purpose for this book is for it to be, a complete flop and for nobody to read it. And,
yes.
That's okay. Like, it's not about my success or status or ego or whatever it is. Like, if that's it's not that the Lord will necessarily help me to, achieve the great things in the eyes of the world, as it were. I think sometimes Christians can get into this strange mindset of using the Bible to sort of make out that God will fulfill any and all of their dreams. People often sort of quote this verse which says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, as if like that means I can win the basketball tournament, or I can, write the bestseller or whatever it is, when actually, Paul's talking more about suffering. Like, he's more talking about enduring suffering than anything else there. But there is this relief, I guess, or this sense of, a joyfulness that we can have if we're followers of Jesus, in knowing that ultimately we're only servants of the Lord.
Yeah.
And He'll do His work. And we're playing our tiny sort of role within it, whatever we're doing. Maybe you're an accountant, maybe you're managing a construction project, maybe you're at home with your kids, maybe you're writing, maybe you're working at a grocery store, whatever it is. That all of these things that we can actually do to glorify him, and all of these things we could be very successful and not glorify him at all. That's the sort of, I guess, the other side of it, is that we could be praised by everybody around us, including, and this absolutely applies to those who, like you and me are in Christian ministry circles, like we could be doing what we're doing, getting a lot of praise from others, and our heart could in fact be completely turned away from the Lord, and we could be just doing this purely for our own purposes, in which case it's ultimately utterly worthless. So I guess sort of, remembering what the goal of any exercise is, which is the glory of Jesus, and how if we are his followers, he will help us and he will be with us in not only success, but also abject failure, where often I feel like he often works most profoundly through us in the times of total failure.
Definitely. Yeah, I've experienced that.
Yeah.
But we can trust that it's all together for our good. And our good is not what the world considers our good most of the time, but be made in the image of Jesus, be transformed, be renewed. So we can rest in that. And I'm always reminded of when I am tempted to give up, bury my head in the sand and just say no to the thing God is clearly calling me to do. It's like saying your spirit, your power, your wisdom is not enough. You are not enough, God. You cannot possibly use me. You are weak, I guess. And of course, that's not what we believe, but that is what we are preaching with our actions.
Yeah. And I know all of us will have different sort of personalities and strengths and weaknesses. I'm curious, as you reflect on the way that God has made you in particular, what have been helpful practices for you, just, day to day? Like if you're thinking about this week, how am I going to be productive alongside, if you are, and again, if I mean, you had a baby only weeks ago. So if you are, I remember at that stage of my life, I was with my first two kids for sure, like purely existing to feed them and keep them alive, so. Yeah. But as you think about maybe in the last sort of several years, what's been most helpful to you just personally in terms of being fruitful and productive with the time that you've been given?
Well, definitely this season is reminding me of one of my greatest weaknesses, that is thinking that I can do it all and that everything can be done in like 10 minutes when it can't. The baby forces you to acknowledge that things now take like 2 hours when before they took like 5 minutes. So one of my greatest weaknesses is this time blindness of, I'll get this done in like an hour. And it takes 2 weeks actually to write a solid article. But in my head, it's like, no. If I push through, I can for sure make it in an hour. So that is a weakness I have. And time tracking has helped a lot to be realistic. Things take time. Our lives are lived in minutes, in hours, and things take the time they take. And I really hate that. I just want to do all the things, and I want to do them fast and to do them well, but to do things well takes time. So time tracking has really helped me. Time blocking, just setting aside chunks of time for specific tasks, forgetting about multitasking. That's not a thing. That helps me right now in this season of just diapers and milk. My tiny habits, I do a lot of habit tracking. I completely stopped habit tracking for the first month postpartum because, again, it's crazy. It's you're getting to know your baby and to see how it's gonna be. But and to me, habit tracking can and it has become sort of an idol sometimes. Like I have, I don't know, a specific step count, and I'm like at 11 p.m. just doing this by my bed, trying to keep up with my habits. So that's not good. But when it's done well, it can help you just have these key important tasks done that really set your mind and your environment in the right track. Things like Bible reading or going outside for some time or walking a little bit. Tracking those habits helps me just to remember what's most important for me to function well and to accomplish the things I want to accomplish. Also, and this is helpful for everyone, just writing things down is something really basic. But for some reason, most people believe they can just remember all the things. And then we are confused about, oh, why am I so overwhelmed? Or why did I forget to do this when it was really important? Because you didn't write it down. You expect your brain to be aware of all the million little things you have to do instead of just putting it on paper and having a set time to go through your list and things like that. So just having a place where everything can be stored and you can tell yourself like, okay, this is in a safe spot. When I have time to get there, I'll get there. That is really helpful. And for me, it's just a journal where I'm just writing things down. Right now, I have very few projects to get done, but having them on paper really helps me remember that they'll get done eventually.
That's great. I know my mum is like that. She'll have a little piece of paper on her desk at all times, and she'll sort of written a list of things, whether it's things she needs, like food she needs to buy, or tasks, emails she needs to send, or tasks she needs to do. I have never been like that, nor do I think I ever will be. I'm terrible at writing things down, and it's one of those sort of features of my personality that I've slightly had to just live with.
And how do you keep track of stuff? I'm curious.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. The fact is, there's a lot of stuff that I don't keep track of.
Okay.
I remember years ago, and I don't know where he got this from, but I remember my brother saying that he'd read somewhere that, write a list of the things that you're doing in life and put the most important things first, and then pick the list up and tear off the bottom portion. Because it's like, actually, if it's not that important, just don't do it. And I'm afraid I think I've sort of functionally lived like that. So
you just go around your house in your computer, and as things show up, you deal with them, sort of?
So this is where it's just getting kind of confessional now, but hopefully I'm creating space for everybody who's listening to this who, like
we're all
me,
different.
is not...
I respect everyone.
So, for example, with my writing, I may have mentioned this on a previous podcast, I felt so helped and seen by reading the portion of a book by Richard Bauckham, who's one of my favorite New Testament scholars, British academic. And he wrote a brilliant book called Jesus Through the Eyewitnesses and various other, he's just this absolutely fabulous scholar of New Testament studies and putting the Bible in its historical context. And from a distance, you would think that he must just be a really disciplined guy to do the kind of work that he's doing. And in this book, he said, people often think I'm disciplined. I actually don't have much discipline at all. What I have is drive. And I thought, oh, that suddenly makes me feel like not the only crazy person in the world, because people sometimes think I have discipline because I write a lot of books. And in fact, I have painfully little discipline. But I do have drive, as in,
yes.
I'm writing this book because I'm passionate about this book. And it's like it's the thing that I want to think about, the thing that I want to do in the morning. It's the thing I'm going to put everything else aside while I'm writing this book, because this is what I care about right now.
Yeah.
And so the book gets written and a lot of other things don't get done.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point, because of course, for me it's reading. I love reading. I don't have to put it on my habit tracker or create a calendar for reading. I'll just read. But I'm not driven to cook, to be honest. So I do need to have that list of okay, I have to buy this and I have to. So I guess it's more about helping myself do the things that I'm not as excited about, but need to get done.
Yeah. And my guess is that, you probably motivate yourself to cook because you have kids who need feeding. And it's a bit like I'm incredibly naturally untidy. All my dirty secrets are coming out now on my sort of dirty laundry, should I say, sometimes quite literally. And I am motivated to do any tidying that I do because I say to myself, I love my much tidier husband, who actually kind of hates the mess that accrues when I'm not doing any of it. And, he's more than happy to tidy himself. But also when I tidy, it's like a way of showing love to him.
Yeah.
Or, when I cook food, it's a way of showing love to the people, in my life who I'm cooking for, which is sometimes, often my family and often extended sort of church family as well. And that I can be blessing people through that. So there's a piece of my heart that's drawn in, even though the activity itself may not be the thing that I most want to do. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, we'll all do things motivated by love one way or another. Yeah. So maybe it's, if what you most love is your reputation or your status or your bank account or whatever it is, you will do things motivated by that. If what you most love is your family or your local church or whatever, it is going to be our loves that will order how we operate in the world, and that can be that can draw us toward good things. It can also draw us toward bad things where we're sort of having to reorient our loves continually, because in fact, it turns out what if I find that I love showing off in front of people? That's not a good motivation. What if I find that I love putting other people down or making sort of nasty comments online or whatever it is? Like maybe I need to then repent of the ways that my heart is kind of exposing what I love there.
Yeah. And we need to be careful, because so often on the outside, things look the same. You could be posting on social media because you like that praise from people, or because you're honestly trying to get across a good message to others. And it's so easy, especially if we are well-versed on the Bible and theology, to rationalize our sin. Yeah, that is, again, why spiritual disciplines, Bible reading, praying, being in communion with other Christians is very important for us to be examining our hearts and making sure that what we do are actually doing for the glory of God and the good of our neighbor, and not to feed on our sin.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think there is a great relief in knowing that, the fact is, I bring my sin to every conversation that I have, every book that I write, every, walk in the park that I take, and that the Lord is gracious and compassionate and merciful, and that He will work even through my sinful, inadequate efforts. Yeah, which is not an excuse for us to not be continually seeking to grow and to repent of the ways in which our sort of sinful hearts are contaminating what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I guess gives us the freedom of self-forgetfulness in that sense, to say, actually, our starting point is knowing that we're sinful, and that doesn't have to cripple us.
Yes.
That can actually drive us to the cross. Thanks so much for being with me today, Ana.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
You've been listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast. You guys can follow us on X or Instagram. You could leave a review on iTunes and maybe even mention there a topic or question that you'd like to see explored in a future episode. Until the next time I talk into your headphones, I pray that your week would be filled with the best kind of productivity, a productivity that is ordered by love, and that it would be a love that is centered on the person of Jesus Christ.